Right, let's get into the news section, and there's a lot going on. The first news item that I pulled up last week, which was supposed to be for Thursday, is to do with Michael Cohen, who secretly recorded a conversation with Mr. Trump 2 months before the presidential election, in which they discussed payments to the slapper known as Stormy Daniels, who she said had an affair with Mr. Trump. The FBI apparently seized that recording this year, not a surprise. They did say there was more to that raid than meets the eye, and the raid on Mr. Cohen's office. Now, the Justice Department is investigating Mr. Cohen's involvement in paying women to block off embarrassing news stories about Mr. Trump ahead of the 2016 election. Prosecutors want to know whether that has violated federal campaign finance laws. Really? And the Clinton Foundation and Obama never broke every rule under the book. Funny no one asked questions then. And that is a common theme these days. And any conversation with Mr. Trump about those payments would be a keen interest to the prosecutors. Now, Mr. Giuliani, who's up to his neck in his own troubles, which will be revealed, some of which already has confirmed in a telephone conversation on Friday that Mr. Trump had discussed payments to Ms. McDougal, also known as the slapper, and with Mr. Cohen on the tape. And he said the recording was less than 2 minutes long, and Mr. Trump did not know he was being recorded and claimed that the president had done nothing wrong. He also said there was no indication on the tape that Mr. Trump knew before the conversation about the payment from the Inquirer's parent company, American Media Inc., to Ms. McDougal. Now, apparently in New York, as a side note to that, someone can record someone without anyone's knowledge, as long as one person agrees to do it. Yeah, I said that right. So you can go and record because you've agreed to record it and not have to inform the other person. I wonder who that purpose and that rule serves, but that's apparently the rule in New York. Now, this figure may have gone up in the time when I pulled it up, but the Trump administration has now reunited more than 700 separated migrant children over the age of 5 with their families thus far, and this is according to a new court ruling this week. And government lawyers also stated over 900 parents are not eligible or not yet known to be eligible for reunification. Now, this is kind of where it's going. A lot of those children are not with parents. This is the real issue behind all this immigrant nonsense. And some of them are, and some of them are very poor families who have come to sell the children. You know, I don't think many of us agree with that, but you know, when you get put in an impossible situation, you tend to make rather poor decisions. But most of these children, like all the ones that came on the train last year, that suspiciously none of them can be located at this time. Well, it's not suspicious, we all know why. And so it's nice to see some of them have been returned, but it'll be interesting to follow up what happens with those 700 once the families get back together. It's a massive, massive problem where children from poor areas in South America and other regions are being funneled through South America and Mexico and across the border. And that is why the wall is going to be built. You've no idea the depth of it. It's barely scratched the surface, even in the alternative media. Now, Thursday's filing becomes a week before the court-imposed reunification deadline, which was this week, I think. And officials have identified 2,551 children to evaluate for reunification. And the deadline was on the 26th, so that was on Thursday. And the Trump administration has now announced that they've reunited 14% of the migrant children who were separated from their parents at the border as part of the zero tolerance policy. We're going to hear about that for a long, long time, I would imagine. I'll say when the full depth of it comes out. I know many of us disagreed with the wall. Who was funding it? Well, the Trust is funding it, not the American people. The Trust has agreed to fund the wall because of the criminality going on down there. Drugs is the least of the issues. You've no idea how many children are being abused and used. What I mean next is another one that's involved in it. Melissa Hodgman Strzok, who was put in charge. Now remember, about 6 to 8 weeks ago, I told people to look out for the wives of the politicians and the people in the commission. Well, here's one of them. She was put in charge of the Clinton Foundation investigation 3 weeks before the last presidential election, and she has been blocking the investigation ever since. Now, she's an associate director of the enforcement division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and she heads the particular international division, and she reviews the evidence and determines what international securities, fraud and other financial cases that will be prosecuted by the Justice Department and also investigated by the FBI. So if she does nothing, investigations on the Clinton Foundation go nowhere, which is exactly where they've gone. And people keep saying, when are they going to do this? Well, this is why. And this is why the administration is going through every department and funneling out all the clowns that are interfering with everything. You know, there's so many investigations now, it's frightening. It really is frightening. And people understandably get impatient with this hasn't happened or that hasn't happened and why hasn't this gone ahead. Well, there's still a whole plethora of filth in every single department that are blocking every single move going forward, whether that be the project money, whether that be the sovereignty, whether that be the American military returning, whether that means investigating and prosecuting all these clowns and pedophiles. They just block, block, block. Well, they won't be able to block forever. So 21 months this Melissa Strzok, whose husband was in the council investigation and performed rather poorly, and done nothing. 650,000 emails on a laptop in another criminal case, and the emails were from and to Hillary Clinton, and yet again done nothing. So that's how people understand why things are not progressing a bit quicker. Is there's still elements in all agencies, in government, and these commissions and departments of justice, you name it, too many of their people are in there and are blocking it all, but they won't always be able to block. Where do we go next? Britain. And as per usual, it gets to the summer and the Brits are being hit, and this is another way to claw back some money that they're losing rapidly. And the Britons heading abroad for the start of the summer last week were being hit by the poorest exchange rates for almost 9 months. I would say it was a lot longer. The Money Corp Bureau at Stansted Airport was offering just 0.89 euros for each pound, which is way below the actual rate and one of the lowest rates that has ever been seen. Now, holidaymakers heading to America were getting $1 for each pound. $1 to a pound. and this is way below. Now, on the official foreign markets exchange, the pound to the euro was 1.11, and they're given 0.89, whilst the dollar is 1.30. So it's $1.30, and they're given $1 out. That's 30% loss, and that is out and out theft, but not a surprise. We're going to hear a lot more about this in the coming weeks, trust me. There's things going on behind the scenes that I can't reveal, but watch out with this particular news item. President Donald Trump has now got multiple reasons as why he should take control of the Federal Reserve, and he will do so both because he can and because his broader policies argue that he should do so. And the president is anti-over-regulating, is against over-regulating American industry. Now, the Fed, as we all know, is a leader in pushing stringent regulations on the nation and has raised interest rates a number of times over this year alone, which has kind of annoyed Trump and accused it of stopping the growth in the money supply, and it also stops further growth in the American economy as well, which is deliberate coming up to the mid-term elections. The economy starts sinking down. You know, it's not great to begin with. There's some aspects of it that's improved, but you tell that to the vast majority of people who are struggling. You know, now the Board of Governors on the Federal Reserve is required to have 7 members, and currently it only has 3. And 2 of the current governors were put in their position by President Trump. So 2 more have now been nominated by the President and also awaiting confirmation by the Senate. Now, after these 2 are put on the Federal Reserve's board, the President will then nominate 2 more to follow them. And in essence, it is possible that 6 of the 7 board members will then have been put in place by Mr. Trump. You'll have to watch this closely. I'll have a little bit of it in the intel portion, but watch what's going on at the Fed. Where next? Iran. Lots of funny games about Iran. What I have to say is it's nothing really to do with Iran, the country, and everything to do with the rogue elements, Clintons, Obamas, McCain's, Bush's, playing games behind the scenes. But the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has said that no country in the region will export oil if Iran's exports are stopped. Which goes, a lot of the pipelines have to go through Iran, and they're in a position to stop it. And the same threat was made earlier by the President Hassan Rouhani, and speaking to Iranian ambassadors and senior diplomats, the Ayatollah backed Rouhani's earlier warning to close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this was being done before a couple of years ago, and there was an incident of Israeli submarines threatening to fire missiles, and someone strafed it, for want of a better word, and practically fried the whole submarine, all of its electronics. So there's a lot of fun and games going on there. And so they closed the Straits of Hormuz, which is a very narrow gap between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think. This will block all oil shipments from the Persian Gulf. So the statement comes in response to anti-Iran rhetoric by the US. Well, it's not the US, it's more to do with the deep state and the clowns, which is currently pressing allies to cut off Iran crude exports. And during a recent tour, a senior State Department official warned that those failing to reduce Iranian oil imports to zero by early November, would then face US sanctions. So, where are we next? Apple. You know, a lot of people like it and a lot of people don't. But this is a small news item. But they've decided this week to pull all QAnon related apps from the Apple Store. Q drops, Q alerts, QAnon apps. The real Donald Trump. I guess they got told by some of the order to stop it. I don't know whether QAnon is valid or not. He certainly validates a number of points that we put in our show. Like I said, it could be another Langley fun and games. It could also be real. Could also may have something to do with the Kennedy family. Time will tell. What it has done is it's got people doing their own research, which is the key to it all. You know, I've said myself about this show, don't believe everything I tell you. You know, obviously there's certain portions of the intel that people are not going to be able to validate. But a lot of the other stuff and opinions are all there for research. So, at least from that point of view, that's, the QAnon has helped people do research for themselves. Some 800 members of the controversial Western-backed White Helmets, helmet being the operative word, will be brought to Jordan through Israel, no doubt, to be reportedly resettled later in the UK, Canada and Germany. Go figure. Now, according to the news item, the UN is overseeing the exodus. Again, no surprise there either. And hundreds of the self-described aid workers who operate exclusively in the rebel-held areas, no surprise, have crossed into Israel from the southwestern Syria last Sunday. And the White Helmets passage has been facilitated by Israel, which reports they have been transferred through a military Israeli airbase. And the evacuation kicked off at 9:30 local time on Saturday and was expected to continue through Sunday. Several roads were put on lockdown by the army and the police as part of preparations for the exodus. Really? Blocking roads to recover terrorists. Now, Israel had previously admitted that it had been providing humanitarian assistance to the Syrian militants, not the government, the militants, and have treated over 1,000 wounded rebel fighters in the hospitals. Make of that what you will. Vladimir Putin has offered to let US officials attend interrogations of Russian officials indicted by the Russiagate probe, and that has been rejected. Go figure. You know, you're not interested in speaking to anyone. They've made their own opinions up and they're just sticking by it. And despite evidence to the contrary, it just carries on and on and on. But it seems Capitol Hill lawmakers have no interest in fair trials when it comes to Russia. No, it's guilty before you even start. And considering the unmistakable liberal bent of the US mainstream media complex, which churns out anti-Trump, anti-Russia stories with more predictable narrative repeated over and over again, and the chances of a Putin-Trump summit winning any positive reviews back home is just about slim to none. But as if to worsen those odds, a US Deputy Attorney Rod Rosenstein, TikTok, with timing so uncanny it could have only been premeditated, announced indictments against 12 Russian military intelligence officers for their alleged involvement in hacking the computer servers of the DNC. Yeah, right. And it's taken how long? 12 months, over $100 million. And all kinds of side issues. Well, but Trump's done this and Trump's done that. And he still can't decide whether it's real or not. And yet I remember the report saying he was completely cleared 2 months ago. And yet, of course, the deep state made him lie on national TV a week last Monday. Which, to me, finally ends any conspiracy theory that the deep state exists and who really runs the country. Predictably, when there's all brown stuff hitting the fan, out come NASA with more revelations that people already knew, but then maybe some have short-term memory syndrome. Us at THI don't. But according to NASA, researchers have found evidence of an existing body of liquid water on Mars. It's the 4-year loop stories again. And they believe that there's a lake sits between the red planet's south polar ice cap and is about 20 kilometres across. And previous research found possible signs of intermittent liquid water flowing on the Martian surface. But this is, according to them, the first sign of a persistent body of water on the planet in the present day. And lake beds like those explored by the rover's Curiosity was present on the surface of Mars in the past. However, the planet's climate has since cooled due to the thin atmosphere, which was caused by wars, leaving most of its water locked up in the ice. Now, I would expect, as the news gets too difficult to stifle, we'll hear a lot more of NASA and repeated news stories and others coming out with the same pile of crap. You know, there was water announced a long time ago, but maybe it was in a different world. I have no idea. Certainly wasn't in our world anyway. Prince Charles has issued a statement this week to a British inquiry investigating child abuse, saying he had been deceived by a disgraced Church of England bishop who was jailed for sex abuse this week. The remarks by the Prince of Wales Friday came amid an investigation into the handling of allegations against the former bishop, Peter Ball, who had claimed to be a confidant of the heir to the throne. Yeah, right, you're not getting it. And the 86-year-old Ball had accepted a caution for one count of gross indecency back in 1993, but later admitted further crimes, and he is jailed for sexually abusing 18 young men over 30 years ago. And Charles said he didn't realise the truth until Ball's conviction. Yeah, right. And he dismissed any suggestions that he had ever tried to interfere in a police investigation, although he acknowledged it was possible that his name had been taken in vain. Now, Prince Charles, unlike Pinocchio, whose nose gets bigger when they're lying, Mr. Prince Charles, his ears get bigger, more so each day. He's lying through his teeth. That was part of the investigation of Scotland Yard 30 years ago. Jimmy Savile, they knew all about it and where it led to, and that's why it stopped. And he was involved in it. Now, Mr. Trump has come out and criticised about high oil prices. And unlike leaders in the Middle East, America can't simply order American oil companies to pump more oil, which reduces the price. Except the price will get reduced soon enough anyway, despite their attempts at interference. Now, West Texas is already producing so much crude oil that it's running out of pipelines to tip it out. But the biggest lever Trump can pull is to release oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is at record levels, as I understand it, and the world's largest government-owned stockpile of emergency oil. Now, analysts are doubting that tapping emergency reserves is not particularly warranted now, but there's grown speculation in the oil markets that Trump will do that just to combat high gas prices ahead of the November midterm elections. Now, over the past month, oil prices have fell sharply, as we warned, not as sharply as we would have liked, as more interference has taken place. And it has been reported that the United States was considering teaming up with other Western countries to simultaneously release emergency stockpiles. That's what it's there for. Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of a prominent US cardinal accused of sexually assaulting a teenager nearly 50 years ago. And the latest one is Theodore McCarrick, a former Archbishop of Washington, who has also been suspended from public duties pending a canonical trial. And last month, US church officials said the allegations were credible, and Mr. McCarrick has said he has absolutely no recollection of the alleged abuse. It's that memory syndrome. Again, you know. And but since then, further allegations have emerged, and Mr. McCarrick was one of the most prominent US cardinals and is one of the most high-profile Catholic leaders to face abuse claims. There's another 300 priests being dealt with in Pennsylvania alone, as I get it. It's happening all over the world. Now, people who want to know about the economy need to get a grasp of this. The untold story of the world economy, so far at least, I happen to believe it's higher, and is the potentially explosive interaction between a spreading trade war and the overhang of global debt, which is estimated at a staggering 247 trillion, all of which is owed by the cabal. None of it the people, or very little of it anyway. And the numbers are so large, it's almost incomprehensible. Households, businesses and governments borrow on the assumption that they will service their debts, either by paying the principal and interest or by rolling over the debts into new loans. Well, this is what happens with the governments. On September the 30th and March the 31st, those debts become payable or get rolled over. Now, some countries are forcing other countries to pay. And of course, on September the 30th, which is the government debt servicing day, we also have an American budget that has to be sorted as well. We're going to see a lot of fun and games and a lot of rhetoric being thrown about between now and the end of September, and maybe some more radical solutions to kick people into gear. But rolling over the debts, this only works if incomes grow fast enough to make the debts bearable or to justify any new loans. Well, incomes haven't. They've collapsed. And so when those ingredients go missing, delinquencies, defaults and at worst panic follows. And where the trade war and the debt may intersect disastrously, since 2003, global debt has absolutely soared, even more so since 2007 when the trust cut off the looting of it. And as a share of the world economy, gross domestic product, the increase went from 248% of GDP to 318% of GDP. And that was in the first quarter of 2018 alone. So roughly 70% increase global GDP in the first quarter. And global debt rose by a huge 8 trillion. And the figures include all major countries and most types of debt, be it consumer, business and government. But to service these debts requires, as I said, rising incomes, while an expanding trade war threatens to squeeze incomes. No, the trade war is not squeezing incomes, it's squeezing others. I'll have more about that later. And the resort to more tariffs and trade restrictions will make it harder, according to the people who wrote this. Borrowers to pay their debts. At best, this could slow the global economy. There is no increase pace. It's been at a slow or standstill for the last 11 years. And they're warning it could also trigger another financial crisis. That will please some and not others. Now, here's another story on banking and finance, and in the maze of subsidiaries, which are part of the problem with these global corporations. This one in particular, Goldman Sachs. They have two groups in London with nearly identical names, and people think it's the same one, but it's not. It's Goldman Sachs International and Goldman Sachs International Bank. Two different companies. And both trade financial instruments known as derivatives with hedge funds, insurers, governments and other clients. And the United States regulators, however, get detailed information only about the derivatives traded by Goldman Sachs International. They don't report on the international bank of what's going on. Now, that's because of a loophole in laws enacted in response to the financial crisis. Trades by Goldman Sachs International Bank don't have to be reported. Rules for one and rules for another. So a decade after the financial crisis, fueled in part by a tangled web of derivatives led by Goldman Sachs and others, regulators still have an incomplete picture of who holds what in this 600 trillion market. Right, we're okay for time. A couple of more news items and then we'll go for a music break, and then we'll be back with some intel. Now, it's come to light that the UK government has now admitted that it accidentally sold at least 10,000 children to known child traffickers in the last year alone. Accidentally, my ass. Tens of thousands of children mysteriously disappear from government care every year, but like America, where they are groomed by sex traffickers, and this is according to recently released government data. And it comes amid concerns that young people are falling into the hands of gangs that are grooming children, following recent scandals in Rotherham and Telford in the UK. Now, some of these children were reported missing for more than a month, and there were 1,720 cases of children disappearing for more than a week, among 61,000 total reported disappearances last year. Now, the Rotherham MP, Sarah Champion, who was campaigning for child safety following the grooming scandal, said it was truly shocking that so many children went missing, and these children are under the guardianship of the state. And that's the problem. And the government should be ashamed that it is failing these children, not failing them, they're abusing them. And the Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield, told a newspaper that schools and care workers need to be able to recognise the signs of a vulnerable child who might be about to go missing. And it also comes amid reports that thousands of children and teenagers are rescued from slavery around Britain every year, but very few of the captors ever face justice. Again, it's no surprise, is it? Just 6% of crimes reported to police under the Modern Slavery Act led to prosecutions since it was introduced back in 2015. More than 1,500 potential victims and 110 suspects have been identified by the National Crime Agency in the UK, and those figures are expected to rise even further. Now, the senior investigating officer on Operation Stovewood said more than 100 officers were needed because of a shortage of specially trained detectives meant many possible victims had not been contacted yet. And it's also thought that a sex gang raped as many as 1,000 young girls over 40 years in Telford and was largely ignored, and is being called what may be Britain's worst ever child abuse scandal. And the Telford MP Lucy Allen had previously called for a Rotherham-style inquiry into the allegations and called the latest reports extremely serious and shocking. Well, at least it's coming out, and that should and has led to a lot of these incidents being drastically reduced. It's still unpleasant and unbelievable. Now, this is part of the rhetoric you're going to hear for the next 2 months, leading up to September the 30th. Trump today has said he would be willing to shut down the federal government if the Democrats do not agree about funding the wall along the US-Mexican border. Trump wrote on his Twitter today that border security includes the wall. We must get rid of the lottery catch and release tactics and finally go to a system of immigration that is based on merit. We need great people coming into our country, and the White House has been embroiled in this controversy over the ongoing efforts to reunite families that have been separated at the border. So Trump's now issuing a statement that the federal government may get shut down. We're going to hear that fairly frequently in the next 8 weeks. And the trust will play a role in that. Of course, it funded the budget last time. And some of the clowns at NATO then proceeded to loot 400 billion out of it. I don't think they'll be doing that again.